Shop Talk. Shop Talk. Shop Talk. Shop.
Hey, welcome everybody to this week's edition of Shop Talk. So today, this is going to be a nice, short, sharp little Shop Talk, but I really hope that everybody will listen to this one, take it on board and absorb it and apply it in your business. It's one that we probably should talk more about, and something that, quite frankly, we will talk more about moving forward in our program. This is about risk. And look, business is about risk. There's no question about it. Almost everything about business is all about risk. You risk financial loss, you risk personal loss, you risk relationship loss, you risk injuries, you risk health, but with risk also comes reward. So, essentially that's why you do it. But really, risk is not something that we want to have high. We don't want to continue to have high risk, but we know risk is there. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about risk in business, and specifically around OH&S type risk. And the main reason I want to talk about this is because complacency is something that kind of fits in and it slips in to humans in general. So it happens around the house, it happens around the shop, it happens on the streets, it happens when you're driving your car. Complacency, and I don't know if you've ever, if you're at all like me, if you've ever been in a situation where, maybe you just weren't paying attention like you should, driving through an intersection or something, and you just had a near miss, like someone just missed you, or you just missed someone. You go, wow, that was a close one. From that point afterwards, you're very, very clear. You're very open-minded and attentive. So risk gets reduced with near misses. But one of the things that happens for sure is our approach in our factories to risk is often the same way across most factories. It's often the same way. We talk about the risks that exist in a joinery business. They are things like dust. And how do we approach dust? We kind of just do what we can and we get on with it. There are noise risks. You risk loss of hearing. I've got a bit of industrial deafness in my ears. Now, that's got a little bit to do with the noise in my workplace. It's got a little bit to do with when I was young, I had a loud car stereo, but either way, I didn't protect my ears. So consequently, my hearing is pretty terrible. It's really not a lot of fun, quite frankly. So, when we talk about risk, these are the things that we talk about. And oftentimes, how risk or even mitigation of risk gets handled is often misunderstood, particularly if you're an employee. And that's why this is so important, because if you're an employee and you're not really sure what's going on about risk, quite often complacency will kick in, and a lot of employees will go, well, I'm okay because the company's going to take all the risk. I've got to tell you, that's not the case, and I don't want this to sound like I'm trying to create any panic or anything, but the laws, particularly here in Australia, and broadly speaking around the world, they're very similar. But certainly here in Australia, no employee is protected because they work from the company. If they do something silly, they're going to get prosecuted just like the company will. And I want to be really clear, like some of the things that can be found, like an employee can be found to be liable for, is a near miss. So if, for example, I'm using an example of we didn't see that ratty old pallet that's on the ground, and we walked past it and we just about tripped, or we just about had a nail on our foot. Whew, that was a close one, and you just get on with your day. And it's proven that you actually did that. It's proven that you actually knew that there was a risk or some sort of a hazard there on the floor, and somebody actually did fall over and, God forbid, injure themselves. And it was shown that you actually knew that that was a risk and you didn't do anything about it. You are absolutely as liable as the company is for not having a non-risky work environment. And a lot of people aren't aware of this. A lot of employees aren't actually aware that they're just as liable as the company is for these sorts of things. It's sort of like we don't want to report near misses for fear of us looking like we're a bad company. And it is one of the complacency problems that exists in the world, but certainly in workplaces. And it's one that I have absolutely observed in many cabinet factories where there are known hazards and nobody's doing anything about them. And so it's important, I think, that everybody knows that nobody is immune from prosecution. And it's also important, I'm not going to dig into all the details here because this isn't what this is really about. But it's interesting that when we talk about statistics, and if you look at statistics over the years, we're not going to dig into too many statistics today, but it's interesting. If we look at the manufacturing statistics back in 2009, 2010, these are claims that had been reported by industry. And you notice that our industry, our manufacturing industry, has gone down. So that's a really positive sign. And that's what WorkSafe does, is they're in place to try and reduce people getting injured. The other interesting thing is you'll notice that the actual construction industry has stayed relatively consistent over the years. If anything, it's gone up a little bit as far as claims that have been reported. So the message is getting out there into manufacturing or controlled businesses like joinery businesses that you've got to start reporting near misses. You've got to start reporting these things. But the one thing I want to make everybody aware of is that prosecutions actually do happen. There are businesses in Victoria and in New South Wales, and again, I didn't dig into every state across the country, but it's important that you know that it isn't something you just hear about or read about. You can be prosecuted. There can be, some fairly serious things that are going to happen if you're found to be, not looking after your people or your business correctly. So, I want to get specific here, and I want to give everybody something very specific, because as you know, Shop Talk is not about creating WorkSafe related things, but it is about what can you do in your shop. What are we doing in the factories? What are we doing actually in your shop to start dealing with risk or controlling some of these things? So I wanted to just share something with you that I find really quite fascinating. That people's approach to, let's say, dust or any sort of a hazard is, the number one, put a dust mask on. Like we showed you here, you've got your ear protection, you've got your dust protection, and we're good to go, right? That's the standard approach. Let's put some protection in place and just get on with it and keep working. And maybe what we'll do is we will do some training about how to reduce the dust or to reduce the noise or to mitigate it, or maybe what we'll also do is we'll maybe try and control it. So we'll move people around, or we might actually put a barrier in place. Like a lot of places have one room here, we have all the machining, and in the next room, we have the setup for the kitchens, because it's nice and clean and it's all controlled, everything is separate. Or we might try and substitute something in here that isn't quite as dusty. Some material cuts and it's less dusty than others, so we might substitute. And then, as a last resort, we might start talking about how do we eliminate dust or how do we eliminate noise altogether. But generally speaking, we don't have too many conversations about how are we going to stop the dust or stop the noise altogether so we don't have any of these issues. So the first approach is always about PPE. That's what we hear over and over and over again. But in actual fact, that is the least most effective approach to solving this problem. So the accepted approach by WorkSafe and by any standards in a dangerous environment is this: to eliminate first, and then look at substitution, and then look at isolation, then look at engineering, and then look at administration, and then do you start talking about PPE. But the very, very, very first thing that we actually want to start having as a conversation in your business, in your team, is how can we actually talk first about eliminating this from happening in the first place. We only have dust extraction and dust masks because we're cutting dust. Now, I know it's really hard to talk about eliminating dust, but rather than over at the bench needing a dust mask, we probably should talk about better dust control on the machines themselves. Rather than having ear protection, we really should talk about how do we stop the noise from happening in the first place. So it might be some sort of an isolation question. So whenever you look at this hierarchical chart and compare it to what you're actually doing, which is probably this, and working your way down from here, what I'm doing in Shop Talk here today, and again, this is just a nice short little conversation about a mindset approach so that we can make your work environment a whole lot safer and start removing hazards, is first of all, think about, is it possible to eliminate the hazard in the first place? So if you got a CNC machine, CNC machines just produce dust. That's all there is to it. But maybe you're blowing the dust off the CNC machine. Maybe we're sweeping the dust off the CNC machine. Maybe we should get really serious about talking about upgrading your dust extraction so that none of that has to happen. And we're actually talking more about eliminating the dust rather than trying to control it. Or maybe we need, so talking about isolating the hazard is, the second or the third rung on the chain. Not just blindly jumping to, well, just put a dust mask on it, or just put some hearing protection on. That's not to say we don't do those things, but what I'm saying is those things done only is really leaving yourself open for litigation. It's leaving yourself open for WorkSafe coming in and saying, well, hang on, did you do any of these other things? Did you do this one? Or did you do this one? Or did you do this one? Did you actually do anything that was going a little bit farther than just putting dust masks on? I mean, we've all seen right now some of the silicosis that's happening in the stone industry, and it's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. And if they talk about eliminating that hazard in the first place, then obviously none of these things are needed at all. So it's really important. Again, this nice, short, sharp little conversation around how do we reduce risk and why take the risk at all if we can eliminate the hazard, or if we can substitute for something else, like maybe a material that doesn't produce as much dust, or finding a machine that isn't as noisy, or maybe not having a forklift in the factory by way of finding material handling methods such as roller systems, or those sorts of things where the risk to human life is a lot lower. If you've ever been hit by a forklift, you probably haven't lived to tell the tale. I mean, they are unforgiving machines. So one of the things that I love to see is just have no forklifts where humans are at all. Obviously, a forklift unloads a truck and loads board onto the rack, but if we can eliminate the forklift to just doing that rather than running around where humans live, injuries by forklifts are not generally pleasant outcomes. So again, removing the hazard from the workplace, in other words, taking the forklift out of the workplace altogether, eliminates us having to figure out, how are we going to have, forklifts and humans live harmoniously together. I'm sorry, they don't. They're just high risk all the time. So hopefully this has given you something to think about. Just a little food for thought around the fact that if you are an employee in a business, or if you are a business owner, which I'm sure everybody falls into one of those two categories watching this right now, and you, first of all, know of a hazard, you've identified a hazard, and you've done nothing about it, and you find out later on, one of the laws here in Australia is that you could be just as liable as a company if somebody got injured. So it's really important to know that you're not protected against litigation just because you're an employee. It's also important to know that as a business owner, you are open for some very serious fines, even jail term in some cases. This is a serious matter. So that's why I bring it up in this segment, because reducing risk in the workplace, particularly a workplace like ours, that is very dangerous. I mean, we do dangerous things every single day just by turning on a machine. It has happened before that we've had deaths from parts flying off CNC machines and hitting people. It's a dangerous, hazardous work environment. So we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to reduce the risk in the work environment so that people don't get injured. And if we're not looking at it from this perspective, where our first and foremost thought process is around how do we eliminate the hazard, or how do we substitute it for something else, or how do we isolate the hazard, how do we maybe control some methods into this so that the risk is lower, and also we'll wear some PPE as a an extra control measure, but not the only control measure. So hopefully that's provided some thought. I'd love to hear your feedback. What are you doing in your factory? Do you feel like you've got adequate risk mitigation in your factory, or do you not? Should we bring a specialist in to help us look at factories? That would be a great specialist to bring to our group. Talk to us, talk about how can we lower risk and have better protection for your employees. I'd be all over that. That'd be a great thing to do. Let's hear from you. This is Shop Talk for Monday, the 2nd of August. Hopefully that's been enlightening for you. We'll chat with you real soon. Have a great day. Cheers.
Shop Talk.